Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Radio Culturale show. I hope that you had a good holiday and a happy 2013 to all. And today we are talking about accepting changes. So, accepting changes in culture, a little bit of talk about reverse culture shock. So, today we are here with Kamala and Sarah, who are two of our ambassadors at the Office of Intercultural Affairs. And as usual, Hong is here as well, too. So, welcome to our show, everyone.
Hi.
It's nice to be here again.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Okay, so to start off, we should probably define what culture shock is and maybe talk about maybe some of the experiences we may have had with culture shock.
Well, I think culture shock is kind of when you go to maybe a different country, or not even a different country, but just a culture that's different than what you have been exposed to before. I think it's more to things that you've never experienced, because you can go to a country you've been to before, and I guess you could still have culture shock, but it wouldn't be as much because you already kind of know what to expect. But I think it's more so when you're in a new environment and new experiences that culture shock occurs.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think you're very right there, because some countries may be smaller and generally have the same culture, but even within a small country or a large country, there are different regions and they have different practices, different traditions, and different things that make up their culture. And of course, we know that culture has various aspects to it. So you can be within your own country and experience a difference in culture or a shock. Yeah.
Even just moving into a new neighborhood,
yes,
new place, and it's still a lot different, I guess.
Yeah. So would any of you say that you've experienced culture shock? And I guess also part of the definition, we know that we have been to different countries that have very different culture, or maybe within our own countries, experiencing different culture. But I think the shock part of it is that you are you cannot really adjust to it. It's so different, and you're not responding to it as you think you would be able to simply just fit in, and you find yourself not being able to fit in. So have you felt like you experienced culture shock before?
In my experience, not yet. I say that only because the last time I went to Vietnam, I was really, really young, and we didn't stay for very long. So I think that when it comes to culture shock, it depends on how long that you've been in a certain culture. So I guess if you have been there on vacation for a week, you're just thinking about how amazing the culture is. Mm-hmm. So it's like a vacation, right, to you. So when you go to, I don't know, Cuba, and then you just think that, hey, this is fantastic, and then you stay there for a week, and then you just leave, and then everything's fine. But when you stay there for a longer period of time, and then you start identifying the differences in cultures and everything, and then you find that you start feeling that feeling of homesickness and stuff like that. So I think that since I haven't actually been at a place for longer periods of time, I don't think I've experienced that yet, but I don't know.
Well, for me, when I came to Canada, I didn't experience culture shock. In fact, I was fascinated because I saw huge wide roads, and so those things were different to me, because the place where I come from, Mumbai, is a relatively crowded city. It's a metropolitan city, but it's very crowded and with narrow roads, more people around. But Canada didn't have as many people. So that was a different thing to me. And then I just observed little differences, a few differences from my culture, but there was no culture shock as such. I would have experienced culture shock if it was, I don't know, if Canada spoke a completely different language than mine. Since I knew English and since I was kind of accustomed to the way of life, I think I was fine.
Yeah. I came to Canada as a teenager, And although it wasn't really a shock, like I didn't really feel like I couldn't fit in, I noticed some of the differences, like, and I lived in Toronto when I came to Canada, and so people would always just be passing you by. No one said good morning or good afternoon, and usually that was something that we would do at home, like anyone who were our elders, we would not pass them directly in the street. So just noticing that people didn't really speak or communicate to each other was a bit different to me, but then it's just something that I kind of got accustomed to. So I think at the beginning I tried to tell everybody that I saw good morning, but then, you just quickly just kind of fit into life here.
Yeah, I think for me it was kind of opposite of Kamala. I went to an American high school and elementary in Ecuador, and so when I knew that I was coming to Canada for university, I kind of came with the mindset of, like, I've grown up in an American school, so I know their ways, and like I won't have trouble fitting in, or like I won't experience culture shock. But then I got here, and like Hong said, like the first weeks it's just like you're on vacation, like especially with O week, like it's not school, it's just like it's just fun and like meeting people. So like I was super excited and like, whoa, like new country, like new culture, this is so much fun. And then like after a month I was like, this is terrible. Like you start noticing the differences, and like as opposed to my thinking that I was like, oh, I'm gonna like understand, like I was like, why are these people like this way? And like like I had a really hard time like adjusting, just because the culture is so different. And like even though I did go to an American school, like the people in the school weren't all American, and they had also grown up in Ecuador, so it was more of like an American like Ecuadorian school as opposed to like I know American culture. So it probably helped me in adjusting here, because I did have some like background knowledge, I guess, of like North American culture, but it was it was hard kind of adjusting, because there was like a lot of shock for me like coming here.
It's a big difference.
So we talked a little bit about maybe some of the differences we noticed, or some of the ways that we felt, and how did it make you then feel about Canada at that moment that you were experiencing some of the differences, and comparing that to how it made you feel about your home country? So for example, I talked about the whole greeting of people. So, my initial thought was, wow, home, people are very respectful. They have the time to, they're interested in you, because it's not hi and just, or maybe some people may say hi, but they just continue on their way. But people would actually stop and chat with you to find out how you're really doing, and, things are good, and say hi to your family, and, things like that. So it really made me feel more homely to be at home, compared to this big vast place where it was just nobody seemed to respect each other or care what was happening in my life. And then so that's how I guess I felt about it initially, until I became just like that. So
I think I had a similar experience like Candace, because when I came, it was first fascinating and all, it was great. But then after I settled in, I started noticing differences between my culture and this culture. So like you say, people here are, even if they say hi to you, they're not saying it because they really want to know how your day was or how you were doing. They're just like casual, hi, how is it going? And they're not really bothered about how it is really going, right? But back home, when you meet people, you more or less know them, and so it's more warm, it's more friendly with them. So and also in university, I just noticed that students are more, to themselves. They like being by themselves, stuck on their laptops or their smartphones. Whereas when I was in my undergrad in India, we would always, group up and talk a lot, chatter, just bitch about someone. So those were the little differences that I found. Like, people here like to keep to themselves, but people back home like to speak a lot.
Okay. And then you had talked about in Mumbai that it was so like overcrowded and things like that. So what did you think about being in Canada, maybe where you can actually have space around you? What comparing that as well to that?
Honestly, I like being in Toronto. I know people say Toronto is so crowded and it's just filled with traffic and chaos. And I'm like, yes, that's more like home for me.
You're a big city person.
Let's go.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel the same way. Ecuador is very like the city's very small, and so since it's in like a valley, you can't necessarily like build all the way up to the mountains, and so there's like tons of buildings everywhere. And then I come here and I like expect the same thing, like Guelph is a city, like, but then I get here, I'm like, where are all the buildings, like what's going on? So I go to Toronto, like feel at home, because like all it is buildings, and like it's kind of more closed. So
yeah, I see skyscrapers, I see narrower roads, I'm like, yes,
yeah,
it's more like home.
Okay. So as you gradually got accustomed to being here in Canada, did it change how you saw your home country? So after you started settling in and starting to feel a part of everything and getting into the groove like everybody else. So for example, you said, Kamala said that students in India kind of just chat with each other, whereas everybody here is on their phones. You started probably becoming more like that. I don't know, but you can talk about that. So how did it, what did you think comparing to your home country? Maybe people should have been more like that, or
did it change things?
Yeah.
Well, there are good things and bad things about that, because like I said, people in my home country like to talk a lot, but sometimes it does get personal.
Right.
And there are no real personal boundaries.
Right.
So it's like, oh, what's happening with your love life? And they expect you to answer.
Really?
Yes, I've heard about that in some cultures. Like they could ask you very personal questions, and it's not a problem.
It's
like,
not,
what is your weight? Like,
yeah.
what?
Really?
Very,
Yeah.
very so.
It's not really a taboo to talk about personal stuff. So it could be really, really personal, and you still, you can choose not to answer, but people do ask questions. So I think that's a bit offending, and especially after being here in Canada and kind of getting used to the non-personal way of speaking. When I went back to India this time, I felt it a bit difficult to adjust to that. And another thing was, we are used to getting pampered a lot. At home, we would have domestic help to do our dishes and to clean the floors, and fix things.
Oh, wow.
We had carpenters, plumbers who would come in and help. But in Canada, you've got to do work on your own. So
Unless
if
you're
you
really
break
rich.
something,
Yeah.
you've got to fix it yourself.
Yeah. Or it's going to cost you a pretty penny. Too,
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. If you look for help, that's going to cost you like half
So
of your
much money.
salary.
Yeah.
On a student budget, my goodness.
Exactly. So now that I'm cooking all by myself, cleaning, it's just making me appreciate things better, because now I know that I was so pampered back home. So those are the few differences that I noticed.
Okay.
I think for me, I guess like when you're away from something, you kind of see it more objectively as opposed to when you're there, right? So being away from home I didn't go home for first semester, so it was like 4 months that I had been away. But even like when I went back for summer, I kind of noticed like the difference even with family life. Like here, it's very independent. Like it's all about you pursue your own dreams, and like when you're 18 you move out, and like it's all about you being on your own sort of thing. But very much there, like people are older and they still live with their family and like their in-laws and stuff, and it's not looked down upon. Like here people are like 25 and they live with their parents, and it's like, oh, like you still live with your parents or like whatever, because like you should be on your own. Like it's that expectation. But there, like people usually like will live with their parents all through university, and then once they're older, like there'll be like a huge house with like all the family, and like they'll all live together, which is, I don't know, like it's obviously what I grew up with, so it's nice, but like I never really realized how much it was I don't know how much independence is really valued here as opposed to in other cultures.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah. So, so you talked a little bit about going back home, and very fortunate for all of us here. We had an opportunity to go back home. Maybe some shorter than others. For example, Hong only went for a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah, for a few weeks.
So, how did you react to maybe some of the changes you saw? So this may be something, there was something little, there was something big that changed, and how did you react to that? Like comparing to your new life here in Canada?
Changes in your home country?
Yeah.
Like maybe not necessarily changes, but things that you see differently now that you've been away.
Yes.
When I went back home for a holiday, I was very fussy about cleanliness. It's like, why are you doing this? And don't do it that way. Keep it cleaner. And
so it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. I just had lunch with a coworker today who talked about going back to her home country and some of the struggles that she had. When she just arrived, everything looked so dirty, and she just was not impressed, with the place. So maybe it could have been like that before she went, but she didn't realize, or maybe things just kind of went downhill over the years and they weren't really taken care of. And so it's hard for you to go home and see, these kind of things that make you think like, would I even live here again? It's hard because this is your home, right? And when we're here, at least most people kind of romanticize about their homes. Like, I can't wait to go home. Home is so great. And then when you do go and these things happen, or you take a friend with you and you're seeing these kind of things, and this is the place that you're spoken so highly about, and then it's I
think it's like it's because of nostalgia, right? Because I don't have any stories about culture shock, but like just in terms of nostalgia, if you just remember back to how amazing were the 90s or something, and you're just remembering back in the good old days, and then you think how much has changed in time, even. So like you've been in just one place even, and you just imagine how time has changed for you in one generation, and then you take yourself and then you move away and then you come back when time has changed, and then it's a lot different. So you don't have experienced a gradual change in time, but it's very sudden. So I guess that's why you start missing everything that you've experienced before, right?
Well, I think, and when you feel homesick, you don't really think about the negative aspects of your own country, of your culture.
Right.
You just think about the positives. So you think about, how warm it was back there. I had friends there, so I had a better time. And here I'm not as happy as I was back home. So that's nostalgia, as Hong said, and you're just thinking about the good things. But when you go back to your country, when you actually go back to realities of your country, that's when it strikes you, because when you're used to a certain way of living for a few months or a few years, when you go back there, it's difficult for you to adjust.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for our friends that have to hear all the good comments, because if they do go, then they'll be surprised that it might not be all that we made it out to be.
I think I hear a lot of people talk about having to go home and everybody is asking for certain things like, did you bring me this? Or, they have to pretty much strip down everything that they have to give away to people because that's what's expected, And so I think we sometimes forget about that as well too. And when we get there, we think, oh my goodness, like, how did I forget that this is what was expected of me, And you think, next time I'm not coming, I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm going to just, find a hotel and stay. But then you forget again. And so I think that's another part of the culture, because again, people are so giving, and just kind of having that expectation. And then you come here where everything is like, this is mine. Not that it's not a sharing society, but you have your personal space, and and then to go back to that again is like, what, Okay.
Oh, but it surely is nice when you go back home and have help. So you're like, oh, Mom, I'll do the cleaning for a day, and then Mom says, oh, don't worry, there's help. You can just
relax.
sleep over. And I'm like, oh my God, yes,
this
it's
is great.
fun.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we can take this opportunity to talk about some of the differences that we saw from our home countries. Like, I know that I want to share at least two stories. So one is not really a story, but I remember as a child, my mom say running out of sugar or something that she needed, and she would just say, no, go ask the neighbor for sugar. And this is something typical, and then the neighbor can come and ask us for flour, and it's fine like that. But I really have not found that kind of niche here in Canada. If I ran out of something,
Asking for a
I'd
cup of sugar.
better go to the grocery store.
Or you owe someone something or other. Like if you knock on
Yes,
someone door,
that's
you, like,
true.
you really owe them something. Or
Yeah, so you feel like if you got something from them, you almost have to pay it back somehow. Yeah, and even if the neighbor never came to ask for flour, they would not say, "Give me back that sugar that I gave you, how many days ago." That's one. And really funny. I don't know how it is in various countries, but in the Caribbean in general, guys would call out your attention in the streets, like they would, a thing called suiting, right? So I can't really do the motion, it's very but they kind of whistle at you. So I was very accustomed to that at home, but the thing is, you ignore the guys anyway, you walk very proudly, but you're feeling good about this. And I think in general most people felt good about this because it meant that you were beautiful or you were desirable. But knowing what Canadians think, they think that is very sexist. How could you call a woman out in the street like that? So coming to Canada now, I was very happy that I was able to walk the street very peacefully and no one's calling out to me. But I think after a few weeks, I realized, well, wait, what's happening? Nobody thinks I'm beautiful or desirable. So I can't wait to go back home. So, going back home again, and then, you start to feel, like maybe a little bit harassed when you can't go anywhere without being called out. But then you're like, oh yeah, wait, this used to be, then I'm desirable again. So that's my difference in culture, I guess, kind of stories.
so you went from it was good to what's going on to what?
Yeah, exactly. Till again, I miss it. So
And then now you miss it.
exactly.
Candace, you're very pretty.
Thank you. Okay. Any other stories?
I think for me, a lot of the times, if you're at little details of living at home when you've been away for so long, but in Ecuador, people never have change for even like a $10 bill or like a $5 bill. They'll ask you, like, I'll buy a bottle of water, which is like 50 cents. And they'll ask you, like, I'll give them $1 and they'll be like, don't you have change? Like, this is $1. You should have change. Like, this is your job, is to give me, not give me change, but like, you should have change.
Yeah.
And so, I completely forget about that because here people have change. Like, I can give them a 20 and like, when I get back from home, I'm like so surprised that they don't ask me for change. Like, oh, don't you have a smaller bill? But like, I get used to that here, and then I go back home and I like buy something that's like $3, and I give them a $5 bill. They're like, oh, like we don't have change, and then they'll give me like the rolls of coins, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I forgot that this is like this, and then I have like my bag is so heavy because all they have is like the rolls, or they don't have like bills, and they have to give me all these coins, and
Okay.
Well, I've grown up in Mumbai. All my life I've lived in Mumbai, and now when I went back, I was bewildered by the traffic jams. I'm like, why are they driving like that? What, do they want to kill us?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was so chaotic, and there was no lane discipline. There was
no lane
order
discipline.
on the roads. And I'm like, I cannot drive here. I cannot even sit in a car and go somewhere because it was just so scary.
It's a terrifying, ride. This is true.
How do you know this?
Oh, I know. So we talked about the phenomenon of culture shock, and we know that there is reverse culture shock. So basically, we have been exposed to culture from our birth or something that we're accustomed to, and then we go away from that, have to adjust to a whole new culture. Sometimes we can fully embrace the new culture. Sometimes we take certain aspects of it, but somehow we manage to live within another society, another cultural society. But we talked a little bit about it, going back to our home countries for a few weeks or a few months. And in my case, for 3 years, I went back home after being in Canada for 10 years. Do you think reverse culture shock is it's a valid concept? Can we go home and find changes in our culture that we cannot deal with? And do you think that one day we can get to that point, or if people can get to that point where maybe these little things can add up and we don't really want to go back home, that we have that reverse culture shock that we won't want to go back.
Well, the reverse culture shock that I experienced were a few annoying things that I found back home. Like I said, people not queuing up to get onto a bus or something,
Right.
or change not being available at shops, and little things like that, the dirt, some of the filth around. But then when I go back home, I also get to meet family, I get to meet my relatives and friends, and it's a culture where you can just walk into a relative's home unannounced, and they'll still treat you well.
Right.
You know, they'll feed you and they'll ask all about how's life in Canada and stuff like that. So when I get all that warmth, when I see that familiarity and a place where I can talk freely, that's when I realize, okay, yeah, this is home too. It
Right.
may be a bit dirty, it may be a bit overwhelming for me, but I can get used to it. So there's no thing that, you know, says, oh, you cannot come back here ever. There's no trigger like that for me.
Okay.
At least not now.
Right.
I think with reverse culture shock, most people, usually it's like you experience it with the bad things because you start noticing the things that annoy you because that's things that get to you most. So I think in terms of that, like definitely people could maybe get to a point where they just don't want to deal with things annoying them, like the little things that they see from their country that they didn't notice before because they were just used to it. And I think it comes down to a matter of are the costs greater than the benefits of living at home, because like you said, like you go back home and essentially, yeah, like the roads may be dirty and it may be really loud, but this is my home and my family's here. But some people may feel otherwise, and they may feel like, oh, my family is here and yeah, I did grow up here, but it's just not home anymore because it's just changed too much and they can't deal with it. So I think it's just a matter of like how you feel when you go, because some little changes that may have happened may affect some people more than they would others. So yeah, like I go home and there's obviously things that annoy me that didn't before, but it's not that it's changed, it's just that I haven't been there for a while, so I haven't been experiencing it. But in the end, it's like, yeah, I still feel like this is my home. And I think it's different too, like going back, that I grew up there while I was just in high school and like elementary, so I never really worked there. But I think for me, like I can't picture myself living there in terms of having a career, but I still feel like it's my home. So like I do experience reverse culture shock, but not to the point that I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I hate this place now, like I could never live here. Like, yeah, I can't picture myself living there in terms of a career, but it's still my home.
Yeah, I think that in general, when you consider moving to a new country, it's a really big dramatic change, because you're pretty much leaving everything that you know behind, back to a place where you have no idea, no experience or nothing, and it's just basically a blank slate. But when you come back, it's just basically like, you know, there are some images that are a bit fuzzy, but you can still see the big picture, you know. So it's not as dramatic as a change as it would be. But maybe if you came to a new country when you were younger and you're used to this, you know, a new country when you were like, if you came to Canada when you were like, I don't know, 14 years old, and you stayed here for however long you were, and then you pretty much dropped everything and then left that to go to live in your home country again, would it be dramatic different as it would be in when you dropped everything and left to your new country or your old country? It's like there are two ways to imagine it, right? Because it's totally different to going back home and staying there and seeing your friends and family, and there's not nostalgia where you can see everything and you imagine everything. It's good because you see, I'm rambling now, but you see all those good and bad things that you've seen before, but you romanticize it because you imagine that this is home, and then you return back to your new home then, and then you stay there, but you haven't yet actually lived in your old home indefinitely yet. So I don't think that you have yet to experience reverse culture shock until you actually begin to like really seriously live again into your old home. Because even if you were to stay there on vacation and live with your parents or live with your family again for a year, it would still be as if it's like extended vacation because you're not actually living there. You know, you're not looking for a job, you're not looking for a visa again as you would before, or something or other. You know, you're not. It's a lot different. So I guess we have yet to experience that kind of reverse culture shock because we haven't actually like started adjusting it as we would have been when we were moving into a new country. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
Well, yeah, I think reverse culture shock is a very valid concept. I know so many people, and from various countries, who said they will never move back home. Maybe when they visited, various things happen, and they start to think about their life here in Canada, whether back home it's due to things like criminal activity increased over the time. It could be just the bureaucratics of everything, like having to wait long in lines for service, and you expect to have that prompt service. So there are a lot of factors, I think, that scare people, I think, from moving back home. But, to those people, I say, you have to give it a chance. You have to spend some time there and live there. It really hurts me to hear people say that they cannot move back to their home. I mean, that's the place that they were born, and that's where they're raised, and that, gave them their original identity. And so I feel like home will always be home. And you just have, you don't necessarily have to accept everything that's happening. Yes, maybe bad things are happening there, but maybe find some way of helping the country. I don't think you should try to change things. Like you shouldn't go in there with a vendetta to change everything because it must be like Canada. But at the same time, you can make some suggestions and try to better your country rather than saying, I've put it aside, I'm not going back there. I moved back to Trinidad after being in Canada for 3 years. Being in Canada for 10 years, I moved back for 3 years. So it was not really like a mini vacation, as Hong was talking about. This was living there. And I think one of the biggest things for me was the driving aspect. So I learned to drive in Canada, and people at home did not really obey the rules of the road somehow. There were accidents, but I don't think abnormally a lot more than, if you were following the rules. So for example, just making at home we would make a wide right turn. The cars that have the right of way they should have the right of way, but they still had to fight with the people who wanted to make the wide right turn when they shouldn't be making it. So I could see so many accidents happening, but it just doesn't, because I think we call it oblige. So people give people a chance, like, okay, you can turn here, it's okay, I'll get the right of way next time. So I think it's a kind of unsaid policy that that makes the country work. That was one of the major things. But then I got accustomed to it, and I can give the bly as well. So when I just started driving there, I was honking at everybody. But then I realized that didn't work. So you just kind of have to adapt to the lifestyle there. And it's kind of funny because people talk about service, like not getting service on time and things like that. But I kind of actually missed that because it gave you the opportunity to fight your way into getting things rather than just, I know when I call service companies here, like my phone company or what, if I say this, I'm having this problem, they're just very easy to say, okay, sorry, ma'am, this is what we will do for you. And it's like I don't even get the opportunity to voice my opinion, but at home you get that opportunity to,
get your emotions out there.
Exactly, yeah. And I kind of missed that. But I will never, I don't think ever in my life come to that point where I will say I will never go back to my home or never love my home, because that's where I originally lived, and that's who I am. And although I can live in the Canadian society and obey the laws, I also know that I have a home out there. Yeah. And so I think now, because we talked, you guys talked a lot about being able to see family and things like that. So, maybe if thinking about it, if your family was not there, or your family were not in your home countries and they were more like maybe around the world or in Canada here with you, would you still feel like you want to go home is it you're going home to see your families, or is it you're going home to see your country, or to enjoy the attractions or the festivities, things like that? So do you think you would? Yeah.
I would definitely want to go home again, if only just to experience. I just want to see family, or just to experience the sights of Vietnam. I would definitely want to go back again. Even though having grown up in Canada, I guess my reverse culture shock would be going back to Canada and seeing how things would be there. But I would definitely want to go back to Vietnam and see how things are there. Yeah.
I would like to go back home too, as often as I could. Even if I didn't have any family there, it would be to see the place, to be in the place where I grew up, and to experience festivals again, because that's something that I really miss in Canada. So when there's Diwali or when there's Holi, I really remember the times I spent in India. So definitely for the festivities and for the sights. Yes, and if out of curiosity, just to see how the place has changed over the years, I would still like to go back.
Right.
Yeah, I'd definitely love to go back to, like, as much as, well, I love my family and their home too, but like the country in itself and like the traditions and the food and just the culture, like everything is home as well. So yeah, it'd be nice to like go back and see like how it's changing and developing and stuff like that. So
Oh, I forgot to mention the food. I'd go back to the food.
Definitely.
Homemade food.
Okay, so do you think it'll be easier for someone to accept changes in their home country when they already have an idea of what the culture is like? So, for example, I had to learn it, but it's actually a good example, because I had to accept that the culture was, again, all right. It's not that they weren't, in the terms of driving, it's not like they weren't observing the rules. Well, they were not. But, there was just that, unspoken, we can do this and kind of get away with it. And, but then was it easier for me to accept that and to get right back into it than coming to Canada and accepting some of the new things that maybe I was never exposed to? You understand?
I think it's harder to accept changes like when you go back home, because the last time you were there, it's probably different than when you would go now. And so you go with the expectation of how you last saw it, but then those expectations may not be met. And so it's hard to adjust to a change in a place where you grew up and see that change when you haven't been present to see the change. But as opposed to when maybe you're like coming to a new country, or even somewhere where you haven't been as long, it may be easier to accept that change because you haven't been around long enough to really experience a lot of changes in that country. So you kind of think, okay, well, this is the way they must do it, so I'll just take it as it is, because you're newer to the country as opposed to having grown up in the place.
It's true.
Since we had the opportunity to, experience culture shock and reverse culture shock, and again at varying levels, right? What would you advise someone maybe from your home or someone who wants to go to your home? What would you advise them about culture shock or reverse culture shock, and how to overcome it, I guess?
Well, I would advise someone going into a new culture to not have very high expectations of the new culture, because when you think too much, when you romanticize something too much, when you land there, it really hits you that oh, what I had expected is not what I'm seeing, right? So it's important not to have very high expectations of the new culture, and it's also important to be more open to accepting the new culture. So if you see something that's different from the way you have been doing it, just accept it. You may not agree, but still accept it as being a part of the new culture. And also about reverse culture, don't think too positively about your own culture, to the extent that when you go back there, it again hits you hard. That, oh, I had thought of it as being different, and things in reality are different. So don't build up too many hopes about your country as well.
Right.
Basically just accept changes so it doesn't really make you
Affect you.
feel out of place.
True. Good point.
Yeah, I think, just be open-minded, because if you set expectations, you're just naturally gonna be disappointed when they're not met. And just don't compare, like, because it's easy to compare, like, oh, it was like this at home or whatever, but it's not home, obviously. Like, they're not the same place, they're not the same country, so just be open to the fact that things are different in different places.
I want to say, just ending, many people come to Canada for whatever reason it is. Some of us come for a little bit, some of us come for a long time, some come to stay. And we talked about some people not wanting to go back home. And I think about how many Canadians maybe romanticize about some of the countries that we come from. And when you think back about it, you know that we have many foreigners in our home countries, and they're living there. And so they also had to go through, we call it reverse culture shock, but that would be their culture shock. And just to think that they were able to adapt to some of the things that we find negative, and they're actually living in that society, and they came from somewhere where we thought was so organized and so clean, and you don't have to wait in line for certain things and things like that. So just knowing that they're there in our countries and they're happy, I really, my whole point again is accept your country for what it is. There are changes. You don't have to put up with everything, but it's just what it is. And it's similar to Canada as well too. So maybe people may not greet you, or they may not genuinely be interested, or you think they may not be genuinely interested in how you're going. But again, that's just the way that things are here. And if you sit and overanalyze these changes, then you may not find yourself happy anywhere. So. Okay.
I agree.
So thanks for listening to our show. Thanks to our guests, Kamala and Sarah, for their input today. It was a very interesting discussion, to me at least. And I hope you do tune in